From the German economic miracle to the devastating World War, from the recovery of national pride to the loss of national sovereignty. No political movement sparked as much discussion in the 20th century as the turbulent National Socialist movement. From the ashes of a crippled Germany, a revolution arose that restored prosperity, racial pride, and lost patriotic feelings to the Germans. A work that would end in a whirlwind of violence and delusions that are still the subject of debate in the world today. To value truth above opinions and to learn the real lessons from history, it is necessary to approach these periods as objectively and as unbiased as possible. Today we are going to learn about the lives of several leaders of National Socialist Germany, which marked a turning point in the 20th century. This is Reina Locario speaking. This is the New Encyclopedia, and I remind you that you can give us great support so we can continue doing this work. Simply by leaving your comments, liking this video, and sharing the material with all your acquaintances. Below you can also find a Patreon link where any support is more than welcome. Without further ado, let's get started. Heinrich Himmler was born just like Joseph Goebbels into a family of devout middle-class Catholics at the time of his birth in the year 1900. The German Empire emerged from a turbulent century, yet also one where it became a global scientific, cultural, philosophical, and economic leader. He suffered from physical ailments throughout his life. Not very sociable and with very good academic performance, he never achieved the level of athletic strength he aspired to as a young man. He devoted himself to studying history, philosophy, and philology. He joined a battalion for World War I, but Germany was soon defeated and he never saw combat. After the war, he chose to study agronomy at the present-day Technical University of Munich. At 18, Himmler witnessed the Kaiser of Germany and King of Prussia abdicate amid revolutions led by German socialists and liberals. He was already 19 when he saw the German Empire collapse. With the establishment of a new democratic and parliamentary republic, and with the subjugation of the German nation to the Treaty of Versailles. During university, Himmler began to develop sympathies for the German nationalist ideas of the time and maintained his dream of pursuing a military career, but was prevented from doing so by his physical frailty. He begins his life in the Freikorps, a kind of paramilitary groups made up of war veterans or young volunteers of various ideologies and tendencies who rejected the new status quo and also fought against the communist insurgency. In these circles, the so-called stab-in-the-back theory was very common, which held that Germany had not lost the war on the battlefields, but rather due to the betrayal of civilian politicians on the home front. It was in these circles that Himmler met the soon-to-be famous Ernst Röhm, a war soldier, decorated and one of the first members of the party and co-founder of the Sturmabteilung, popularly known as the Brown Shirts, the first militia of the future ruling party. These circles instilled in him a warrior and military attitude that he would maintain throughout his life, as well as a strong disdain for Bolshevik communism in the streets. Meanwhile, hyperinflation and unemployment hit Germans hard, especially former soldiers struggling to adapt to civilian life. By 1923, Himmler joined the party and took part as just another member in the so-called Beer Hall Putsch, the failed coup attempt that would end with Adolf behind bars, and with Himmler left without a job and forced to return to his parents' house in the midst of economic frustrations. During this time, Heinrich Himmler abandoned and came to despise Catholicism. And he developed a great interest in the ancient Germanic pagan beliefs that existed before Christianization, developing a passion for esoteric and occult ideas, which later became very important when he was already in government. As we will see later, Himmler also became very critical of the Freemasons and, once in power, persecuted them. Himmler soon displayed the versatile skills essential for any politician within the party. He wasn't the best speaker, but he wasn't the worst either. On the other hand, he was an outstanding manager, strategist, loyal man, and ideologue. In 1925, he made a move that would mark the rest of his life. He joins the famously ruthless SS, which was created as a protection squad for the party leaders. But in the future, under Himmler's leadership, they would become the most powerful paramilitary organization in Germany and much of Europe, carrying out police, military, surveillance, and security functions in the service of the state and the party. His intelligence and organizational skills were very remarkable in the eyes of the party leaders. And he was also appointed as deputy to the head of propaganda, developing a complex but effective bureaucratic machine for the proliferation of propaganda everywhere. He also writes many articles and essays. At that time, the SS were actually a division attached to the Brown Shirts, but Himmler convinced Adolf to turn them into an elite, compact, and powerful unit. And having earned his trust, he is appointed as deputy leader of those forces at the national level in 1927 and as main leader in 1929. Walter Dare's concept of blood and soil as the main link between nations. His call to return to agrarian life also greatly influenced Himmler's thinking. Parliamentary democratic Germany, after centuries of monarchist and authoritarian rule, now faces severe political instability. Poverty, hunger, and the deficit are now worse than in wartime. Vagrancy, prostitution, and other vices are increasing on the streets. And the high presence of non-German groups in positions of power is viewed with suspicion and resentment. In this context, in less than 5 years, the party goes from having 12 seats to having 230 seats in 1932 in the German Reichstag, that is, in Parliament. In the same way, when Himmler takes over the leadership of the SS in 1929, this was a small force with no more than 300 men. By the next year, it had become an elite group of 3,000 Germans, and by 1933, when Adolf is appointed Chancellor of Germany with the majority of Parliament, the SS made up a powerful group of 52,000 members. But their rise as the great police force of Europe was yet to be seen. The SS were not just a security force, they were the core of the new German government. They were not just another police apparatus. Himmler conceived them as an order of knights, heirs to the Teutonic Knights and inspired by the operational methods of such orders. Like the Jesuits, like a violent warrior elite, devoted to a greater cause with absolute obedience. The SS had an exceptional ideological and spiritual component, even developing its own internal religion. Its members were selected under strict moral, physical, and racial criteria, and were subjected to harsh training. Criteria that even Himmler likely wouldn't pass. Members' public and private lives were governed by rules even stricter than those of the German army. The marriage of a member of the SS could only take place with women of proven Nordic ancestry. They were encouraged to have at least 4 children, but in reality this was rarely achieved. Himmler, like many colleagues, supported forming a new German aristocracy through selective procreation based on ethnic standards. And the SS was the preferred space to fulfill this mission. The truth is that in 1933, the party finally had the majority in Parliament and the chancellery of the country. The collapse of the Weimar Republic begins, and the establishment of the new dictatorial republic in the Roman style. With the legislative powers granted to the new chancellor, and with the de facto outlawing of the Communist Party, Himmler is in charge in the same year, in 1933, of creating the first prisoner camp in Dachau. The first prisoners were communists and social democrats. Guarded by the SS, strict rules were imposed for the order of the prison camps for surveillance, harsh punishments, and the use of prisoners in work shifts. This model served as the basis for future prisoner centers in Germany. Thousands of people from all kinds of groups considered enemies of Germany and the government would later pass through that Dachau prison, as well as criminals and vagrants who proliferated during the Weimar Republic. It is also reported that this and other prisoner centers were used as pharmaceutical laboratories by companies that are still operating today. The next year, Himmler becomes chief of all German police forces. Similarly, Göring, who founded the Gestapo but was concerned about its effectiveness, gave leadership to Himmler. With this, the German secret police now also came under the control of the SS, led by Reinhard Heydrich. He served Himmler, with whom he remained very close until the end. Amid all this, a troubling internal threat to the government emerged, not from leftists or liberals, but from within their own ranks. Ernst Röhm was a very popular leader who was also in command of the Sturmabteilung. Made up of millions of brown shirts who far outnumbered the German army, Ernst Röhm proposed to Adolf that he be named Minister of Defense so that the brown shirts could absorb the armed forces. Adolf preferred to be on good terms with the conservative and experienced high military command of Germany. There were also rumors that Röhm was seeking to stage a coup d'etat. Finally, the decision is made with Himmler, a decision whose execution later became known as the Night of the Long Knives. When more than 100 leaders of the brown shirts, including Ernst Röhm himself, whom Himmler had once been a protege of, saw their lives ended along with other party dissidents at the hands of government henchmen, Himmler's SS finally became independent. And its growth was unstoppable until it became the great police and security organization of the state and the supreme leader. Meanwhile, the Sturmabteilung became a social organization dedicated to physical activity and sports. Alongside repressing dissent, the German state gained new dynamism. Finally, once political stability was achieved and the economic forces were aligned under the government's national plan, the economic and social indicators for most Germans began to show excellent results in the following years. Likewise, in the years leading up to the war, Himmler finally unified and took absolute control of the state's police and security forces, merging them with the CSSC. Although they formally answered to the Ministry of the Interior, in practice they were above the state, subordinate only to the supreme leader and no one else, under the command of Himmler. Thus, there remained the police officers, the commissioners, the investigators, the agents, the spies, and the jailers from all over the country. This is how he became the mastermind of Germany's intelligence, control, and security operations. He was among the 3 or 4 most powerful men in Germany. His relationship with Adolf was never personal or part of his inner circle, though they maintained regular contact with absolute obedience. In the peaceful years before and during the war, Himmler was the main architect and executor of the policy of marginalization, deportation, and imprisonment of criminal dissidents and groups outside of German nationality. Estimates of deaths due to this policy range from hundreds of thousands to over 5 million, depending on the historian. Within National Socialism, there were several influential men who saw Christian morality and the church as a force opposed to the revitalization of German culture. A racialist and Darwinist, Himmler was, as mentioned, interested in old Nordic pagan traditions from a young age. Although numerous high-ranking Catholics and Protestants supported the new German government, many Christians were also subjected to persecution and imprisonment. Himmler's SS played a central role in this policy. In fact, Himmler forbids the presence of Catholic and Protestant chaplains during the war within his military units. This issue was accompanied by one of the most curious aspects of the movement, which was the incorporation into its ranks, especially the SS, of symbols and mystical and esoteric practices rooted in the many legends of ancient Aryan peoples, which would be, according to them, the true cradle of human civilization. similar to legends like Atlantis, Thule, and Hyperborea. But the Nordic beliefs of Himmler and other leaders were not a state policy. There was a shifting relationship, at times persecutory and at times praiseful, with both neo-paganism and Christianity. In 1935, Himmler founded the Society for the Research and Teaching of German Ancestral Heritage. This society carried out archaeological expeditions in Brazil, Argentina, the Himalayas, and places like Tibet in search of the birthplace of the Aryan race, including ancient sacred texts and relics. The search for the Holy Grail was also popular, especially during Himmler's 1940 visit to Franco's Spain. He personally visited Toledo, the ancient Visigothic capital and an important Templar site, and it is believed that his visit to this ancestral place was linked to his search for the Holy Grail. Himmler also acquired the 17th century castle of Wewelsburg to turn it into the spiritual center of the SS. In Germany, where it is believed various black magic and necromancy rituals occurred. The insignias on SS and other military uniforms featured runic symbols used for nearly 2 millennia, including the central symbol of the Reich. The swastika has an ancient origin used in Old Eastern religions with a strong Aryan component, and it means good fortune. In the SS, initiation ceremonies and winter and summer solstice celebrations replaced baptism and other Christian customs. War approaches in Europe and Himmler forms SS combat units. These were the much-feared Waffen-SS, who played a major role in the war. With Austria and the Czechoslovak Sudetenland annexed, Germany sets its sights on Western Poland as part of its policy to reclaim the old German living space. The Soviet Union and Germany invade and split Poland under a pact. Great Britain declares war solely on Germany. This marks the beginning of what became known as the Second World War. The Europeans engage in a brutal bloodbath. Now, Himmler had the complicated task of ensuring security on the home front and fighting on the external front. A harsh military conflict begins as Germany launches aggressive blitzkrieg attacks on Poland, France, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway. In this policy, Himmler oversees the Waffen-SS. Not just tens of thousands of enemies neutralized the first year of the war, also the supervision and protection of government institutions in occupied territories. Himmler claims the war with the Soviet Union was a crusade for traditional European values against the so-called atheist Bolshevik hordes. Many volunteers from different European countries joined the Waffen-SS against the Soviets. Italy firmly supports Germany, while Franco's Spain only sends some troops, maintaining a more neutral role. Additionally, tensions arise between the army generals and the SS officers, as the career military officers complained about excessive violence and cruelty from the SS. The SS also accompanied the German army in its offensive on Soviet territory. Germany builds new prisoner camps on the outskirts of its territory where hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war end up. Soviets and other groups seen as enemies of German interests. Heinrich, the closest to Himmler of all, dies in an attack in Prague while he was in charge of the occupied Czech territory. On the home front, as the war intensified, Himmler accelerated the forced deportation of countless non-German groups from the country's main cities. On that same home front, Himmler fails spectacularly when he is unable to prevent a conspiracy that nearly takes the life of the top leader. Operation Valkyrie, led by German officers, took place in July 1944. Despite Himmler's serious failure, his power increases as a result of this event when he is given command of the Reserve Army. During this time, he was also Minister of the Interior, overseeing prisoners of war and armaments production. But with the strong backing of the United States as they joined the war and landed in Europe. The harsh Soviet counteroffensive in the East and the regrouping of European forces by the British. Only a miracle could give Germany a win. Adolf, relying on an ever-tightening inner circle that included Himmler, makes the final efforts for total war. Himmler is given the important responsibility of stopping the Soviet offensive that was about to enter Germany, but after a few months he is replaced due to his poor performance. This was the first sign of their relationship worsening. After this setback, Himmler would become one of the main proponents behind Adolf's back of initiating peace negotiations. Himmler last saw the supreme leader on his birthday, April 20, in Berlin. Defeat was inevitable, and though Adolf insisted he would not abandon the capital, Himmler, Göring, and other top officials quickly decided to flee. Himmler advances his surrender talks by meeting a Swedish World Jewish Congress representative to negotiate releasing tens of thousands of prisoners. And who supports your hypothesis about the waves of the disease? Typhus, poor nutrition, and unsanitary conditions were the main causes of most deaths in the prisoner camps, or possibly a planned policy of mass execution. 2 days later, through the mediation of the Swedish consulate, Himmler writes a letter to the American General Eisenhower, stating that Germany wished to surrender to the Western armies and ally with them against the Soviets. The Allies reject the plan. At the same time, Adolf learns about Hitler's actions through a British Broadcasting Corporation bulletin. He considered him his most loyal follower after Goebbels. Furious, he calls him the worst traitor he's ever known and orders his arrest and that of his associates. But shortly after, the supreme leader of Germany writes his will and last testament and ends his life. According to official sources, Karl Dönitz is named as the successor to the supreme leader, and Himmler offers several times to be accepted as second in command of his new government. But Adolf's last order was the absolute dismissal of Himmler from any position, ousted by his own partisans and on the list of the most wanted in Europe by the Allies. He goes into hiding with a few loyal followers after several days. He was captured under a false identity, and after passing through several prisoner camps, he finally confessed his identity and asked to speak with General Eisenhower. The British soldiers transfer him to headquarters amid physical and verbal abuse. There, according to official reports, Himmler took his own life with a poison capsule. Other investigations say Himmler was killed by British soldiers beating him. Thus ended the life of the cunning, unflinching, and cruel Heinrich Himmler, a life full of legends and myths, like all the figures of this period and perhaps like every figure in history. He was tasked with realizing a utopian grand ideal of reviving an old Nordic aristocracy and the safeguarding of a state that aspired to become an empire that would last 1,000 years, no matter the cost. On his shoulders also rested the multitude of anxieties, pains, and deaths that this racial ecstasy brought about. Himmler was merely an instrument, effective, unfeeling, shrewd, but still just a tool of the mysterious forces shaping history. Joseph Goebbels was born into a family of devout middle-class Catholics in the small town of Ried, south of Mönchengladbach in Germany. His father, a factory worker and accountant, and his mother from a farming family, welcomed him on October 29, 1897. Germany was just 20 years old then, 22 years after the German Empire unified as a nation-state under Otto von Bismarck. The brother states were among the world's leading economic, cultural, and Christian centers in the 20th century. Goebbels was well-behaved, excelled as a top student in elementary and high school, and was very skilled at piano. Without much physical attractiveness, with a chronic lung inflammation, and with one leg shorter than the other due to a bone infection. At an early age, his limp and physical frailty were compensated by extraordinary intelligence, a quick tongue, and a melodious voice. In high school, he wanted to join the First World War but was rejected due to his disability. Helped by the Federation of Catholic Students, of which he was a member, he obtained a scholarship to study Germanistics, history, and philology at several German universities, earning a doctorate from the University of Heidelberg in 1921. It's important to put into context that just a few years before he earned this doctorate, the German Empire had collapsed due to defeat in the First World War and an internal communist revolution during the war. The Treaty of Versailles required Germany to cut its army, surrender key territories with German populations, and pay very high reparations. Likewise, for their reconstruction and to begin paying these reparations, they were forced to take out loans with extremely high interest rates from international banks. Although the name German Empire was kept, a new constitution was approved based on foreign pressures, which transformed Germany's political and military system into a parliamentary democracy. Thus began the period known as the Weimar Republic, from 1918 to 1933. This period was characterized by constant political upheaval, social decline, and a severe economic crisis. On the other hand, it's also necessary to put into context that there had long been conflict and debate in Germany regarding the place in that country of the members of the Hebrew religion, whose most common name we will avoid mentioning due to this platform's demonetization policies. The members of the Hebrew religious group had already been expelled at least 3 times from neighboring territories between the 14th and 16th centuries, accused of being usurers and subversive to internal peace. In the 19th century, under Otto von Bismarck's rule, most political factions commonly referred to this group in a critical or derogatory manner. It was a matter that was publicly debated, especially as members of that group gained more positions in key institutions of the country. The resentment against that Hebrew group existed long before the arrival of the National Socialists, and during the decline after the First World War, it reached very high levels due to those who saw them as responsible for the defeat and the internal revolutions of the country. Returning to Joseph Goebbels, once he graduated, he returned home with the dream of becoming a writer. After hating his stockbroker job, he became an unsuccessful journalist and also worked as a private tutor. Since then, his articles already showed a sharp criticism of what they called soulless materialism and the modernist culture in which Germany was immersed. At this time, Goebbels was searching for an identity and began distancing himself from Catholicism. He immersed himself in the works of Dostoevsky, Stuart Chamberlain, and Oswald Spengler, known for the decline of the West. He also read the socialist ideas before and after Marx. By 1923, he became interested in the National Socialist German Workers' Party. This party had been founded in 1920, and its genesis was in the groups of former soldiers who had united to fight against various communist revolutions that had unsuccessfully risen up in different regions of Germany. Supporters of an ethno-nationalism tied to conservative socialism from Otto von Bismarck's era opposed both capitalism and Marxism. The party caught Goebbels' interest after the failed coup d'etat led by a man named Adolf. Convinced by the party's program and the charisma of its leader, he formally joined in February 1925. And in a very short time, he quickly stands out for his talent in combining words and political ideas, along with excellent oratory skills. Adolf manages to win the loyalty of Goebbels, who for a time was hesitant amid the internal leadership struggles of the party. By 1926, Goebbels is appointed as the district leader of the party. For Berlin, the Berlin metropolis was one of the party's weakest areas. But Goebbels quickly infused new dynamism into the section, taking control of the Sturmabteilung and the SS and emerging as a skilled organizer and public speaker. He faced the tough job of gaining the working masses' support who leaned toward the Marxist left while also seeking favor with the middle classes. In Berlin, Goebbels started creating innovative methods in propaganda and political organization. He used to say that whoever conquers the streets conquers the masses, and whoever conquers the masses conquers the state. He organized small, colorful street marches with songs and flags, and encouraged clashes with communists to gain publicity for the party. He innovated in both the design and phrasing for pamphlets and posters. His speeches were very well planned and rehearsed, as was the entire staging. He founded his own newspaper and established a school for training and public speaking, understanding that above books and political or economic programs, people would mostly follow preachers. Goebbels also never missed an opportunity to use humor and sarcasm. He was very skilled at making jokes about his opponents. When Chancellor Brüning declined to attend the debate he was challenged to, Goebbels debated an empty chair with the Chancellor's photo and a recording of his speeches, with a wit and irony that made the Berlin audience burst out laughing. In this way, Goebbels is the architect of the foundations that would allow the party to expand dramatically in the coming years. In parallel to all this, the Weimar Republic continued to decline, inflation and unemployment were fierce, while the banks demanded their debt payments on time. The political landscape was turbulent with the growth of Marxist groups, while the liberals, conservatives, and social democrats in power did not guarantee stability. Culture, the press, and art promoted vulgarity, vice, debauchery, and pornography. The German people felt emasculated, having gone in just a few years from a vigorous empire to a degraded republic. Not a few Germans, among them Joseph Goebbels, viewed with suspicion and resentment the high presence of members of the Hebrew religion in the main positions of the communist, social democratic, and liberal parties, in the leading newspapers and film studios, in the lending banks, in the capitalist funds that bought German properties at devalued prices during the crisis. And among the Weimar Constitution's leaders and drafters, it is in this context that an ethno-nationalist group like the National Socialist Party emerges, which exalted the German race and conceived of the nation as a mystical union of blood and soil, with the right to exclude those who are not part of that bond, directly targeting, from its beginnings, the members of the Hebrew religion. The party's original program called for the unification of Germans to build a great Germany, with a series of political, economic, territorial, and social transformations that are impossible to summarize. Goebbels was already becoming the great disseminator of National Socialist principles: love and diligence for the motherland, German racial unity, self-determination of the people, and recovery of old German territories, an economy based on work and not on usury, exclusion of Jews and foreigners from all important positions within the nation, and their deportation from the territory if necessary, promoting and distributing private property for the national good, freedom of worship as long as it does not go against the values of the Aryan race. A strong, centralized state ensures national well-being and oversees the country's vital forces, in addition to the elimination of the Treaty of Versailles, among many other principles. Similarly, the movement rejected Marxism, materialism, liberalism, and capitalism as causes of Germany's collapse, and as ideologies that had been created by members of the Hebrew religion, foreign to the German people. Goebbels in 1928 wrote, I quote, "They lack creativity, produce nothing, and only trade products. They have corrupted our race, land, and morals. When have you ever seen them working instead of looting, corrupting, and living off the sweat of others? This will change when we are truly Germans." End quote. During these years in Berlin, Goebbels made one last attempt, unsuccessfully, to enter the literary and theatrical world. Politics was definitely his destiny. So much so that despite the numerous women he was with during this period, He rejected any kind of formal relationship that might interfere with his career. Following conflicts and internal disputes, Goebbels was appointed party propaganda director in 1930. This was the final consolidation of Goebbels as part of the National Socialist nomenclature. From there, he built an empire of over 120 newspapers nationwide, along with various methods for spreading and promoting ideas. Elected as a deputy in 1928, he sought as much controversy as possible in Parliament to gain media exposure. More than once he had to appear before the courts due to defamation charges, not without earning the applause of many people for his harsh criticism of the corrupt political class. His work also attracted strong support for the party among young people. Before taking power, they had already won nearly all the country's student federations. At that time, he met Magda Richels, a divorced woman he would later marry, with Adolf serving as best man. In the early 1930s, Germany's government coalition was faltering amid economic chaos. In the 1932 elections, the National Socialists went from 12 seats to an astonishing 107 seats in parliament. Under Joseph Goebbels' leadership, the party's political, electoral, and propaganda organization gained relentless momentum. Months later, due to political instability, elections were held again, and the National Socialists won 230 seats and 14 million votes. Street violence between political factions was widespread, causing over 100 deaths. Parliament President Hermann Göring demanded the government restore peace. Goebbels, in turn, had spent years building the image of an Adolf as the great leader that Germany needed to achieve unity, peace, and rise from the ashes it had been in since the First World War. Finally, after achieving an alliance between the National Socialists and Conservatives, Adolf is appointed as Chancellor of Germany by President Hindenburg. On January 30, 1933, in an attempt to stabilize the country. In this way, Adolf and his movement reached the most important position in the German state. Amid a country economically devastated and near civil war. That day, to mark the occasion, Goebbels holds a torchlight parade in Berlin with 60,000 militants. A month after his appointment as chancellor, the famous Reichstag fire occurs, pointed out as an attempted communist insurrection. President Hindenburg and Adolf's cabinet issue the decree that suspends civil liberties and begins the de facto outlawing of the Communist Party. The following month, Parliament passes the so-called Enabling Act, which granted legislative powers to Chancellor Adolf. This marked the beginning of the end for the Weimar Parliamentary and Democratic Republic, and the transition to a National Socialist dictatorial republic. Goebbels was a key player and the mastermind behind the party's policy. Despite their anti-capitalist and anti-bourgeois rhetoric, the National Socialists received significant funding from major European companies, and even from Wall Street tycoons and international bankers, such as the Rockefellers. Over time, they toned down their anti-capitalist rhetoric to focus on anti-Marxist and anti-Jewish rhetoric. The German government began a process of penetrating and unifying all the vital forces of the country through genuine persuasion or direct coercion. Business owners, banks, labor unions, civil associations, agricultural groups, schools, the media, and clubs of all kinds align themselves with the strategic goals of the National Socialist Program. Many companies are privatized, and efforts are underway to replace the gold standard with the labor standard, to issue money and gain more control of the country's finances. With strong state supervision and a policy of grouping corporations together, the German economy experiences exceptional results. The deficit and inflation drop substantially, industry and purchasing power grow, and unemployment disappears completely. March 7, 1933, Adolf appoints Joseph Goebbels as Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. being the youngest in the cabinet at only 35 years old. From then on, a process of large-scale education and propaganda began, making use of all the media connected to cultural and intellectual life. Meanwhile, Goebbels helped draft decrees and other chancellery communications. Throughout all these years of government, Goebbels was the main architect of the direct and indirect supervision of the press, academia, cinema, art, music, and propaganda. Governments achieved control over these areas using various mechanisms, including organizing each media, artistic, or educational guild. In various government subchambers, Goebbels set key communication guidelines for top media outlets. The National Socialists were also pioneers in the use of radio and cinema as means of mass propaganda. The government also begins a policy that over the years intensifies to marginalize, deport, and neutralize sectors of the population of Jewish origin, and other groups seen as opposing German interests. Just as it represses thousands of dissidents who might compromise the stability that the regime had finally achieved, Goebbels also organizes the so-called Action Against the Anti-German Spirit, which aimed to restore patriotic values in academia and literature. The most memorable example of this policy was the famous book Burnings, where works by Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Sigmund Freud, and many others were destroyed. The National Socialists claimed these authors promoted communism, atheism, vice, debauchery, and other ideologies they believed led to the Weimar Republic's economic, moral, and political decline. Radio stations in all regions were supervised by the Reich Broadcasting Corporation. The Reich Film Chamber regulated that films contrary to National Socialist morals were not broadcast. The state bought Germany's largest film studio. Authentic blockbuster fiction and documentary productions were made to promote the government's ideology, such as the grand documentary called Triumph of the Will, films that glorified the German past, or fiction movies that subtly promoted the eugenics programs carried out by the government. For the National Socialist government, German racial unity was above everything else, including God and religion. They were neither conservatives nor traditionalists. Goebbels, already distanced from his Catholic past, viewed Christianity and National Socialism as irreconcilably opposed. This led some spokesmen of the German church to condemn racialism, ethnic persecution, and eugenics programs as contrary to moral law. Hundreds of priests, nuns, and religious laypeople were arrested. Catholic publications were neutralized, and crucifixes were removed from public buildings. Catholic education in schools was reduced, and during the war, convents and church properties were expropriated. Goebbels, among the government's most anti-clerical members, often accused the church in speeches of being morally corrupt. However, the Führer ordered a reduction in hostilities against the church in 1937. Meanwhile, hostilities toward the Jewish population intensified. It is very common for the phrase to be attributed to Goebbels that if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it without stopping, people will eventually believe it. However, in truth, there is no evidence he authored this or ever said it. Rather, he was a proponent that effective propaganda should be accurate and based on the truth. Beyond the fact that in practice he undoubtedly resorted to lies, Goebbels in 1934 said, I quote, "Good propaganda does not need lies. It's a mistake to believe that people can't accept the truth. It's just a matter of presenting it in an understandable way," end quote. Numerous historians claim that Germany's information policy during the war managed to be superior to that of the Allies regarding the monolithic nature of information, and as for which information was considered more credible and serious by the non-involved countries. The truth is that after this period of relative peace and exceptional economic growth, due to multiple factors that deserve a separate video, And against the wishes of the majority of the European population, the main powers of the old continent began what would be remembered as the Second World War. The continent would be submerged in the blood of millions of valuable Europeans. No power remained untainted by serious crimes. Internally, the first years of the war were easy for Goebbels as Minister of Propaganda, since the German victories alone were enough to boost the morale of any German. Externally, most of the mass media in the territories occupied by Germany also came under Goebbels' supervision. All information that was transmitted was more strictly controlled than ever, just as the other warring powers did. From music and cinema to news, which was now broadcast in more than 53 languages. Adolf personally reviewed a special weekly newsreel that had to be shown in every movie program during the early years. Goebbels didn't hesitate to use any event during these years that could be exploited for communication purposes, such as the Katyn massacre perpetrated by the Soviets, the Poles who at that time were allies. But Goebbels' real challenge came in the last 2 years of the war. As German troops faced major defeats, cities were bombed relentlessly and basic goods became scarce. It was during this dramatic period that Goebbels proved his skills as a mastermind at shaping public opinion. Historian Heinrich writes that Goebbels managed to sustain the population's hope, morale, and blind faith in their Führer until the very end. During their hardest suffering, the German people stayed loyal to Adolf's flag and held on to their faith. The supreme leader slowly cut back on public appearances and speeches. So the modest young man from Radar named Goebbels ended up becoming the main voice of the government for the German people, while his country was the center of world attention. His speech on February 18, 1943, at the Sports Palace after the defeat, Stalingrado is especially remembered for the emotional fervor it stirred in the audience. He said, "The nation is ready for anything. The Führer has given the order and we will follow him. We have unshakable faith in victory. We see it before us. We just need to reach it and subordinate everything to it. People rise up and let the storm break loose." End quote. After Adolf's speeches, such a deafening and fanatical ovation had not been seen. At that point, the German economy still operated normally, and Goebbels was a proponent of the concept of total war, which the country had not yet embarked on. Goebbels was among the first officials to admit to Germans how serious the situation was and that defeat was possible. The Allies and the Soviet Union were advancing strongly. Mussolini had fallen, and German cities were being bombed daily. Goebbels was one of those who suggested to Adolf that the responsible thing to do was to negotiate a ceasefire, but Adolf categorically rejected the proposal. While other high-ranking National Socialist leaders were starting to fall apart, Goebbels still dared to appear in public, in person before the masses, and with his speeches managed to restore their faith and hope. In addition to his propaganda work, Goebbels also had to take on organizational duties in 1944 as plenipotentiary for total war. He is responsible for ensuring that industry, energy, transportation, telecommunications, education, food, and fuel networks continue to function in Germany amid the chaos of war. But defeat was imminent. Millions of Germans were fleeing westward. Goebbels delivers his final radio broadcast on April 19, 1945, maintaining the same eloquence and controlled passion as always. While acknowledging the seriousness of the situation, he declares that he will fight until the end and die with his children, defending the capital city. Adolf dictates his last will and testament and appoints none other than Joseph Goebbels as the new Chancellor of the Reich. According to official reports, Adolf takes his own life on April 30th. With him, the National Socialist adventure ended. In Adolf's will, Goebbels states the only Führer order he would disobey was fleeing Berlin as the new Chancellor, and that for reasons of humanity and loyalty, He would die with his wife and children at the Führer's side. Goebbels refused to join the high-ranking officials who were preparing to flee. He sends a message to Adolf's personal pilot that said, "Tell Dönitz that we are not only capable of living and fighting, but also of dying." Finally, with testimonies that vary in the details, Goebbels and his wife ended the lives of their children and then took their own. From the ecstasy that raised Germany into a new power, only rubble and death remained. The last commander of the Berlin defensive area was now authorized to request unconditional surrender from the Soviets, thus ending the war earthquake that Europe had experienced for 4 years. The 20th century, known as the era of progress in science, was also marked by the harshest wars. In the name of the new modern ideologies that replaced God, in the name of democracy, communism, freedom, and nationalism, more people died in less time than in any other conflict in history. The German case is especially significant because, unlike movies about heroes versus villains, every tragedy doesn't have a justification, but it does have causes, which are often simplified, trivialized, manipulated, or hidden. The human storm, with National Socialism as a key player, takes shape in an industrious, disciplined, and proud people who had just been humiliated, impoverished, and bombarded with cultural and political forms very different from their own. In Joseph Goebbels, they found the mastermind to exalt their most intimate ambitions, the pent-up resentments and hidden pride of a German people who once again aspired to be at the top of the world. A politician and communicator par excellence who mobilized the aspirations and resentments of an imperial nation toward an apotheotic ecstasy of national resurgence, which had its final result. Millions of German bodies fallen in the fields and streets of Europe, and German sovereignty divided among the powers they sought to fight. Otto Skorzeny was born on June 12, 1908 in Vienna, the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His successful engineer father sparked his interest in science and technology. His mother was a cultured and refined woman dedicated to household duties. She taught him several languages and instilled pride in his aristocratic ancestry. He was the eldest of 3 siblings. Despite Vienna's poor socioeconomic conditions then, Otto grew up privileged and cosmopolitan, surrounded by books and art. From a young age, he was intelligent and curious, enjoying reading about history, geography, literature, and philosophy. He was also passionate about sports, especially skiing, boxing, and fencing. With a strong character and adventurous personality, these sports helped him develop physical skills and resilience in the face of danger. He received a Catholic and conservative education, which emphasized values such as patriotism, honor, and discipline. He grew up in a stable, wealthy family, though during a turbulent historical period. By that time, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which had been formed in 1867 and had established itself as a true European power, was in decline, and it was facing the internal nationalist tensions of the peoples that made it up, as well as the ambitions of foreign powers that wanted to dismantle it. At 10, Skorzeny sees the First World War end and the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapse. This deeply affected him, causing his family and young Otto to feel nostalgic for their homeland's lost greatness. Like many Austro-Hungarians, he rejected the Treaty of Versailles, seeing it as a humiliation for Austria and Germany. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had fought alongside Germany in the Triple Alliance during World War I. This treaty, which imposed harsh conditions on Germany, which had to cede territories, pay economic reparations, and limit its army, also severely affected the Austro-Hungarian Empire, upon which another treaty also fell, the Treaty of Saint-Germain, which forced the empire to break up into several independent states. Thus, the former Austro-Hungarian domains were divided into Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and parts of Poland, Romania, and Italy. The Treaty of Saint-Germain also banned Austria from reuniting with Germany. In this way, Austria was experiencing a great loss of population, resources, and prestige inherited from the former empire. In addition, the newly created states of the old empire had to face economic, social, and political problems resulting from the war and from the coexistence of different nationalities. In 1919, Otto enrolled in the Royal Gymnasium of Vienna, a prestigious secondary school where he received a demanding and diverse academic education, where he stood out for his academic performance and for his leadership among his classmates. There he joined the youth organization Burschenschaft, which advocated pan-Germanism, nationalism, and conservatism. Skorzeny identifies with these ideals and opposes socialism and communism, which he saw as a threat to Western civilization. By 1927, he graduated with honors and enrolled at the Vienna University of Technology to study mechanical engineering. During university, he was active in the city's political and social life. He joined the Freikorps Rosbach, a paramilitary militia that fought against the communists and separatists in Austria and Germany. He also joined the Austrian nationalist movement, which opposed the Treaty of Saint-Germain. Skorzeny joined the Austrian Fatherland Party, which openly advocated for the union of Austria with Germany. He also joined a German university fraternity during these years. These fraternities were major centers for the comprehensive development of their members and, above all, for public relations. In these fraternities, sword duels were a common practice as exercises to forge character. Skorzeny joined several of these duels. Are those the ones that leave him his famous scars on his face? Those scars were considered marks of honor in that German culture. By 1931, Otto gets his engineering degree and starts working at a construction company. The following year, he marries Margaret Schreiber, a young Viennese woman from a good family and of Jewish descent. The couple had 2 children. At the beginning of the 1930s, with the rise to power of the National Socialist German Workers' Party in Germany, Skorzeny, like many Austrians, sympathized with that cause and joined the division of the National Socialist Party in Austria, made up of those who also supported this unification and Germanic resurgence. However, this would be at first a passive involvement for Otto in his early years, since he did not get too involved in politics. Although he was a first-hand witness to the failed coup d'etat of 1934 against the Austrian Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss. This failed coup occurred a year after the National Socialists came to power in Germany. Skorzeny works as an engineer in the family business and travels to several European countries. However, he couldn't resist his passion for adventure and the military for long. So he decides to enlist in the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, as a volunteer in the Condor Legion, which had been a German aviation unit created to support the Francoist side in the Spanish Civil War. In that war, Skorzeny shows courage and skill as a pilot and as a soldier, and his name begins to stand out among the German ranks. He took part in several bombing missions and combat operations, and was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class and promoted to lieutenant. He also comes into contact with the newly created German special units, the Waffen-SS, who impressed him with their training and ferocity. Skorzeny's membership in the National Socialist German Workers' Party in Austria would become more aggressive in 1938 when Austria was annexed to Germany. One main goal of the National Socialist program was to reintegrate Austria into the German Empire. This annexation took place after strong diplomatic pressure from the Germans on the Austrian government. They eventually occupied the territory militarily without facing Austrian resistance. While many supporters in the country celebrated, Skorzeny enthusiastically supported this union and volunteered to collaborate with the German troops entering Vienna. In 1939, World War II broke out, and Skorzeny went to Germany to join the regular army and to be assigned to an engineering unit. His first act was joining the invasion of Poland, overseeing the demolition of bridges and railways. Skorzeny, a tall, strong, charismatic man with a cool mind, quickly made his natural leadership and military strategist qualities known. But he was more drawn to special operations than combat between armies. His greatest aspiration at that time was to become part of the German special forces and carry out secret operations behind enemy lines. He didn't know that not only was this ambition about to come true, but he was also about to become the Führer's favorite man for these special secret operations. To the point of receiving the nickname of being the Führer's favorite soldier and earning praise from high-ranking British military officers and those from other countries. Within a few years, the opportunity for his desires would come in 1940 when he was recruited by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the German Military Intelligence Service. In this way, Skorzeny is recruited by the famous SS, the so-called Protection Squadron, which would become the great military police force under Heinrich Himmler. Once recruited by them, he is sent to a secret school where he receives training in sabotage, espionage, parachuting, and hand-to-hand combat. Within this structure, he quickly rises to its elite corps, the Waffen-SS, where he specializes in special and commando operations. It is these kinds of special operations, in the style of Hollywood secret agents, that earn him much of the reputation he still holds today. He begins this career as a special agent in a select division, popularly known as the Führer's Personal Guard. He stands out in this division and is then sent to the 2nd Division of the SS. Between 1940 and 1941, he takes part in the campaigns in France, Holland, and the Balkans. Once again, he continues to show great talent for war, commanding relentless operations in the Russian campaign. In 1941, during Operation Barbarossa, he is awarded the Iron Cross, but he falls ill and is sent back to Vienna. After recovering, he fights on the Eastern Front, where he was wounded several times and awarded the German Cross in Gold. Upon returning to Germany, he is promoted to reserve captain and assigned to intelligence services. There, he is promoted to commando chief and tasked with training special troops for warfare, guerrilla tactics, sabotage, and kidnappings. But at the specific request of the Führer, who already held him in high regard, Skorzeny is called to the battlefield once again. He is entrusted with commanding new surgical and strategic operations. The first of these operations, perhaps the most outstanding during the war, was Operation Oak, in which Skorzeny was selected by the Führer to lead an elite team. He was tasked with finding and then freeing the Italian leader, Benito Mussolini, who was imprisoned in a hotel located at the top of the Gran Sasso, a mountain in the Italian Apennines. It was a very risky operation due to the terrain's topography, and because the soldiers guarding Mussolini had orders to execute him at any sign of an escape attempt. After months of preparation and locating Benito, on September 12, 1943, Skorzeny and his men arrive in gliders camouflaged with Italian markings and surprise the guards on duty. They managed to rescue Mussolini without firing a single shot. This operation earned him the admiration of the Führer and the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Prime Minister Winston Churchill called it a great act of military daring. In 1944, he received another special order. He was tasked with capturing, dead or alive, the commander of the Yugoslav partisans, the famous Joseph Tito. Skorzeny leads the operation as the Germans parachute in, reach the partisans' headquarters, and though outnumbered, defeat them. But Tito escapes and his whereabouts are still unknown. On the other hand, Operation Panzerfaust was another notable maneuver in which Skorzeny intervened to prevent the Hungarian regent, Miklos Horthy, from surrendering to Tito's partisans. October 15, 1944, Skorzeny personally leads the operation in Budapest, where he ends up kidnapping the son of the Hungarian regent, who was the one negotiating with the partisans. And he also takes the castle where his father, the regent of Hungary, was staying. He takes them to Germany as hostages and forces the regent to resign, and thus allow Reich troops to install a government aligned with their interests in Hungary. Another well-remembered one was Operation Grave, which supposedly aimed to assault the American headquarters and take the life of General Eisenhower. In this mission, Skorzeny leads a special unit of Germans who spoke English very well. This unit infiltrates behind Allied lines during the Battle of the Ardennes, wearing American uniforms and driving captured vehicles. Their goal was to sow chaos and disorder among the Allies, capturing bridges and strategic targets. However, the operation did not achieve its objective, as many of the undercover German soldiers were discovered because of their accent and lack of knowledge. American slang, later being executed practically on the spot. Would this later lead to Skorzeny being accused of violating the laws of war for using enemy uniforms? However, he was acquitted of this accusation since a British officer stated in that same trial that the British had also used enemy uniforms, referring to Skorzeny. In the war, he was also linked to another attempt to kidnap General and future United States President Dwight Eisenhower, as well as the attempt to assassinate Allied leaders at the Tehran Conference in 1944, but neither operation could ever be carried out. At the end of the war, Skorzeny was in Berlin, where he received the order to organize a clandestine resistance against the Allies. However, he decides to escape to the south, hoping to surrender to the Americans. On May 16, 1945, Skorzeny was captured by a group of American soldiers near Salzburg, in Austria. The soldiers recognized him by the giant scar on his face and took him to a prisoner camp where he would be interrogated and accused of various crimes. He was moved from one Allied prison to another, treated well, since he was considered a legend by his military enemies. In 1947, he was tried by an American military court for Operation Grave, but was acquitted due to lack of evidence and, as we already mentioned, with the help of British witnesses. There, he said that he was an engineer, not a career military man. He remained in Dachau prison because other countries still wanted him. But finally, that same year, he manages to escape from the detention camp with help from former CSS comrades and elite British officers. He ends up taking refuge in Franco's Spain, which he would later come to call his second homeland. But after the war, his life remained full of notable controversies. Skorzeny then became a fugitive, wanted by several countries for his high role in the National Socialist government. He took refuge in Spain, where General Francisco Franco granted him political asylum and protected him from continuous extradition requests. From there, Skorzeny worked as an engineer for major German companies, while maintaining contact with former National Socialist officers and collaborating with various underground organizations that helped convicted National Socialists escape international justice. During his stay, he strongly supported forming an anti-communist military corps in Spain, anticipating an imminent Third World War. He never denounced or distanced himself from National Socialist ideology and maintained contacts with other former leaders, like Adolf Eichmann and Josef Mengele. He was active in the Odessa Network, a group of former SS members who helped ex-National Socialist militants relocate to countries like Argentina, Egypt, Syria, and the United States. Skorzeny also took part in mercenary, security, and espionage activities for like-minded governments that requested his services and expertise. From Spain, he frequently visited Egypt and Argentina. What about his post-war relationships? He is notable for his connections with Juan Domingo Perón and Evita in Argentina, where he was a security advisor to the presidential couple. He was a personal friend of Juan Perón and the personal bodyguard of Eva Perón, about whom there were even rumors of an alleged romance. He was also later accused of being involved in the attempted assassination of the Argentine president, Arturo Frondizi. He also served as a military advisor to Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egyptian regime, training troops and advising during the war with Israel. Paradoxically, he reportedly also worked with the Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, on operations targeting Egyptian and German scientists involved in weapons development. For Gamal Abdel Nasser himself, who was an enemy of Israel, this would have been done in exchange for the Mossad removing him from their wanted list, although Skorzeny strongly denied ever working for the Mossad. He insisted these stories were false until he died. By 1957, he traveled to Ireland, where he was warmly received by Irish nationalists. He bought a farm and lived as a farmer for a while, but had to leave because he wasn't granted a permanent visa. He did all this while obsessively practicing a wide range of sports. He also focused on reading and writing many articles about international military and paramilitary issues. Skorzeny praised his time in Spain, saying he enjoyed a great life there with his family. There, he published his memoirs in 2 volumes titled Live Dangerously and We Fought and Lost. During his last years, Otto Skorzeny lived in Mallorca and died of lung cancer in Madrid. On July 5, 1975, at the age of 67, he remained a faithful adherent of the National Socialist doctrine until his last days. His body was cremated in Madrid, and his remains were taken to Austria, making stops where commemorative acts were held by nationalists from all over Europe. He was buried in a coffin wrapped with the colors of National Socialism, and his remains were interred in his family's mausoleum in Vienna. Thus ended a life worthy of fiction, of an ambitious engineer with military experience who became the special agent of one of the most powerful regimes and the most explosive in the history of Europe. A special operations agent who earned the fear and contempt of many, but also the admiration of people around the world. In his memoirs, he insisted on being remembered as an adventurer, as a lover of action, and as a simple servant of Germanic national ideals. He was never condemned for his wartime actions and spent his final days in Spain. Without ever stopping his occasional involvement in these adrenaline-filled activities, for him, more than a political cause or a job to earn money, they seemed more like a very, very personal hobby, and no less important because of that. This is Rinaldo Carrillo for the New Encyclopedia. I invite you to click the bell so you get notifications every time we publish a video. Follow us on Instagram at the New Encyclopedia, and comment, like, and share our content with your friends.